Good afternoon. This is the Accessibility and Disability Policy webinar series. Today we have with us Sharon Rush of Nobility, Linda Sims of DECU, and Michael Moore of the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. Our topic is digital accessibility, the invisible civil rights challenge of the 21st century. All right, our panel. You can see them all. Sharon, your mic is muted, so you might want to just make sure you unmute when you do share information. Why should state agencies or government care about web accessibility, and why is it important? Let's start with Michael, since you work for a state agency.
Okay, so web accessibility is extremely important for state agencies because we're moving access to so many of our services and so much of our information online. We communicate via email with our clients and with members of the public. We communicate through websites. We're using applications to provide access to services. And so if we don't provide those in an accessible manner, then not everyone is able to participate. And this is extremely important for people with disabilities, because a lot of times people with disabilities may not be able to make it into an office or be able to get access to services as easily as somebody who's not disabled. And so by putting things online, it makes them much more available. Also, people don't always are not always free during the time that our offices are open. So this makes us available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then by making things accessible externally and internally, we also open up a lot of opportunities for employment with our agency for people with disabilities, and we can retain staff who become disabled.
Sharon, would you like to share your perspective?
Well, I can't add much to that. I think that's a great set of requirements, and I would just remind people that people with disabilities are no different than any other citizens. You know, they want a responsive government and one that's interested and dedicated to the common good. So I think government agencies, even though accessibility is something that all of us are interested in and are dedicated to providing, I think government agencies have a particular mandate for all the reasons that Mike said.
Linda, anything to add?
You know, Mike and Sharon have given you great information, and the only thing that I would really want to add is to reinforce it is a legal requirement, so you should do it. But before that, I want you to think about who invented the web and why. Tim Berners-Lee invented HTML in the first web browser. The whole point was to provide information and ideas freely to all minds. So the foundation of the web is accessibility for all. And how can you limit the sharing of ideas and services? It's slowing down the benefits to our society to reaching our full potential.
Very good, thank you. All right, next question. What resources are available in the public and private sector to help state and local government meet web access requirements? Glenda, let's start with you on this one.
Oh, good. Pick me. She picked me. So one of the things that I'll mention is a free resource that is called ACTS. And I'm going to drop it into chat right now. This is a tool that will allow you to test web pages using a browser extension. It is completely free. And what I love about the project is it's an open source project so that all of the accessibility community can contribute to one set of rules and we can share them freely. So that's one of the first things that I want to mention. The second piece that I want to mention comes from, interestingly enough, Blackboard's Accessibility Resource Center. And so even if you're not a .edu, I want to make you aware that Blackboard has proactively created some beautiful documents that could help anyone. And some of the documents include proactive accessibility guide, how to find obvious accessibility problems, as well as guidelines for building a digital accessibility problem and what to do if you get a complaint. So even.gov should look at these beautiful resources.
Sharon?
Well, I always send people to the source. You know, the W3C is the standards maker for all the web, and they have a web accessibility initiative. I put the link in there. Another hat that I wear, in addition to Knowbility, is I co-chair the Education and Outreach Working Group there for the accessibility, for the web accessibility initiative. And that link will take you to a number of resources that, you know, let me step back a minute and say, don't start with the WCAG guidelines, because that will make you just want to go shoot yourself. So what you want to do instead is look at, on that web accessibility initiative, there are accessibility fundamentals, planning and managing guides. There are all kinds of resources that are written in human language that help you make a plan to start wherever it is that you are, and to, you know, it's everything. They have tutorials for the tech crowd. They have general policy guidelines for people who, you know, who make policy, and managers who have to really start to institute a program. There are quick start guides for people across all different kinds of roles. And so I think this is a really underused resource. It's a global nonprofit that is dedicated to exactly what Glenda said earlier about Tim Berners-Lee. This was Tim Berners-Lee organization when he started the web and the World Wide Web Consortium. And there's no one more dedicated to equal access for all, and it's a volunteer organization. People reach consensus from organizations all over the world, and so they have a real interest in meeting the needs of a broad array of stakeholders. If you're really gung-ho about accessibility, it's great to volunteer at the W3C. Get on one of the working groups or the task forces or the community groups, and that's a way to really interact in a proactive way with your peers around the world. It's very exciting work, and you know, reaching consensus sounds like, oh yeah, you just talk for a while, and there's challenges to it, but it's definitely rewarding and worth it. And I know that both Mike and Glenda have been involved to some extent with W3C initiatives, and can speak to that too.
Michael.
Okay, so both Glenda and Sharon have mentioned some resources that are some of my favorites. And so I've got a set of starting tabs that I use on my browser every day. I'd have two tabs that point to the W3C. One of them points to how to meet guidelines, and I'll go ahead and drop that in here. Let's see. And that has that's organized really, really well so that you can filter the standards. It clicks to the understanding part, and it clicks to you can click straight through to test methods, failures, all of that sort of, those types of things to help you. I've used Axe. That's one of the plugins that I have installed, and all of my team has installed in our Chrome browser. We also use Wave, which is another free plugin from WebAIM. The WebAIM site is an extremely good free resource that's available out there, and they also have a really good active mailing. What do you call it? A kind of a chat list, so that where you can ask people, and you get responses from people that have been doing this for well over a decade, and a lot of them almost since the very beginning of the web, and adding and doing accessibility. There's a ton of free plugins out there for your browsers. The web accessibility toolbar is another one that we use a lot. The built-in developer tools in Chrome and IE are extremely helpful. And so all of those things are available.
Great. As you can see, we have some pretty savvy people here on our panel. And so I got ahead of myself and did not introduce them. So let me have them introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their background, because they've all been doing this for a very long time. That's why we chose them to be on this panel. Sharon, would you start for us?
Sure. My name's Sharon Rush. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit based in Austin. We work globally, but we are based here in Austin and celebrating 20 years this year. So our whole mission is to support and create inclusive online experiences for all abilities.
Glenda?
So I must admit that I think of Sharon Rush as my accessibility mom, because she's one of the people that helped me into the industry and helped introduce me and open doors to learning and networking. And so I wouldn't be in this role today if it weren't for her and Dr. John Slayton. I've been working in the field of accessibility since the late 90s. And my first role where I was paid to do accessibility was at the University of Texas at Austin. I worked there in that role for over 10 years with one of the people that helped write and co-edit WCAG 2.0. So since then, I've gone on to work for a company by the name of DeQ. I moved to DeQ in 2011, and I'm the director of accessibility services. And this career path, love it. I can't separate my passion from what I get paid to do. And I do forget to stop at 5, but that's about my only problem.
Very good, very good. And Mr. Moore?
So I first got introduced to accessibility by Sharon Rush in 2003. Nobility was looking for some volunteers, and I volunteered to help out there. And so they asked me to work on their website, and I put together a form, put it up on the website, and about 5 minutes later, I got a phone call from Dr. John Slayton, who said, "Mike, I can't use this." And so that was kind of my baptism by fire. And John helped me figure out what I was doing wrong. Apparently I did a fairly good job, because Sharon hired me full-time after that. And I worked with Nobility until 2006. And then I went to the state and worked for DARS, where I met Ron Lucy and worked for him for a while. You might be familiar with Ron. And then I came over to HHSC, which was kind of the mother agency of DARS. And I have been here as the accessibility coordinator and now the accessibility supervisor for a team of 6 that I lead. And we have about an agency of about 50,000 employees, and our services impact the lives of virtually every Texan in the state.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So,
Well, I just want to add one thing, Randy, because
yes.
Glenda and Mike were both so kind to say about their origins with me and Nobility. But I have to say, the nature of this work is that through the years, I have learned as much from them as they have pursued their careers and gone forward and made the difference in people's lives, so that when I get stumped by something, I can call Mike or call Glenda and say, how would you solve a problem like this? And so it's a very, one thing about the community of accessibility professionals is that it's very supportive of skills development, because we all share that same mission.
And it's always changing. It's always changing.
Always changing.
All right, let's get back to our questions. What are some of the most common examples of accessibility barriers people with disabilities encounter when trying to access public services on the web? And we'll start this time with Sharon.
Well, I would say, one of the things you have to think about is that not all disabilities are the same, and so the barriers are going to be different depending on what is the disability and what is the experience of that user. So, you know, for blind people, you're going to have problems with video content, anything that's image-based, images without alt text, which is often the first thing that people learn about. But then there are other barriers as well for other kinds of disabilities. If someone's deaf and there's video content and they haven't done what you've done so well of providing captions, you know, that entire experience is not accessible to them. If someone relies on keyboard navigation because they do speech input maybe, or other kinds of assistive technology, then having all of the function mapped to the keyboard is really important. When there's dynamic content and what's on screen is changing, you also have to let blind people know about those changes. And there are some videos called perspective videos. Let me put that link in here in the chat, that kind of go through different kinds of challenges, contrast, keyboard access, those kinds of things in real short little clips. And if you find yourself in an agency where you're the internal advocate, these are very helpful to illustrate the points and to help people understand what some of those barriers might be.
All right, Michael, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, based upon the testing that we've been doing recently, the things that seems to be coming up over and over and over again right now, there's a big design trend toward low or almost no contrast between the foreground and the background text, which makes it hard for everybody to read things. There's a trend of putting the form field label, the visible form field label, right inside of the form field, so it disappears as soon as you type into it. That's another issue that we're seeing. Another really, really common issue is exposing where keyboard focus is located. There's a lot of people say, okay, well, this shows up for a screen reader user. And yes, the button will say what it is, the link will say what it is, but if I'm a sighted keyboard user and I'm trying to get around an application, I can't see if I can't see where I am, I can't use it. And I'm seeing that as probably one of the most common barriers that's constantly coming up in the applications that we test and the software that we look at. And so that's probably, right now, is probably, to me, the #1 barrier.
Okay. Glenda, what can you add?
So what I'll say is Sharon and Mike totally got it. The one additional thing that I want to provide, other than saying I completely agree with what they said, is WebAIM put out a fabulous research paper recently, and I'm looking for WebAIM research on the top 1 million home pages. And so I'm going to drop that link into chat right now. And what did it mention? Low contrast text, one of the first things Mike mentioned, if not the first thing. Missing alternative text for images, form labels, and then 2 others, which were empty link text and missing document language. And the only thing that I'll say about those top 5 is those are things that can be found automatically, whereas Sharon and Mike gave you a fuller picture because they weren't just focusing on the automated testing that WebAIM did, but they were talking from the experience of the full manual process.
Gotcha. All right. And we had somebody ask earlier, and I know you put it into the chat box, Glenda, but the WC3 is Worldwide Web Consortium, in case somebody is asking.
Yeah.
Or curious. Next question. Are there training opportunities to learn more about accessibility? And so let's talk with Michael first.
You probably should talk with Sharon first. There's this little thing coming up next week called Access U. And so I'm going to steal her thunder a little bit, but this is probably one of the, to me, it's the premier international accessibility conference, and it's held right here in Austin. And it's out at St. Edward's University. This year it's 2.5 days, plus they have the full day sessions as well. And this is an opportunity for anyone to come and learn from some of the top experts in the world. You can't go anyplace else and run into the level and the experience of the people that are going to be there. And so to me, that's one of the best opportunities. Also, I'm going to plug my own site a little bit here. So I'm going to put in the HHS Accessibility Center. We have training videos and resources on that our site is publicly available. And so there's training videos. We've done a lot of stuff to help with document accessibility, showing people how to use templates and stuff. And so that's something I haven't seen a lot of other places. And then there's also private industry provides an awful lot of training that's available. Glenda can probably talk a little bit about what her company does.
Sharon, tell us a little more about Access U and some of the special events you have going on this year.
Okay, well, Mike described it really well about, as opposed to other kinds of conferences, Access U is really focused on training. So our goal, they're 90-minute sessions. Our goal is to make sure that people leave with improved skills in accessibility of everything from documents to media to standard HTML web pages. So there's a wide gamut. We have 7 different tracks, including a K-12 track, and we try to meet the needs of developers, designers, UX people. And it's good that you mentioned the special events, I think, Randy, because one of the things that we try to do, we don't approach accessibility as much from the legal and, get real scared or you're going to get sued kind of point of view, even though, of course, that's an issue. But we like to approach it as a design challenge. And when you engage developers and designers in that aspect, like, don't you want to engage this group of people and accessibility as a design challenge? So we try to have evening events that also are creative in that sense. We're going to have accessible karaoke at Schultz Garden on Thursday night, which is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So we're going to have ASL described karaoke, and we try to have fun around the idea that this is not just what you do for regulatory reasons, even though you do have to do it for those reasons, but you can also have a lot of expressive creativity, have fun, and learn, constant learning.
Other training opportunities, Glenda.
I have to third that Access U is the best conference to learn accessibility because of the way Sharon designed it. It's not these 40-minute brief sessions where you just shallow into the content. No, they're at least an hour and a half long. Some of them are 3 hours long. Plus she has workshops at the front end for the whole day deep dive.
I love the fact that Glenda said the way Sharon designed it, because actually we designed it, Glenda and I designed it in John Slayton's office, moving sticky notes around on a whiteboard. So
but I think you were the visionary. So. And when I think about it, that's one of the uniques. The longer sessions, the emphasis on hands-on learning whenever possible, the way you make us prep as instructors, where what are your objectives, what are your goals, what are people going to learn? It's outstanding. And if you don't have the funds to attend the physical conference, Sharon, is there still room in the online portion?
Oh yeah, the Access U Online is definitely, you can sign up for Access U Online, and in fact several, I don't know Texas state agencies, but I know New Jersey and a couple of other states have signed on for a meeting room, so you can get a whole conference room, pack it with as many people as you want, and pay one fee, and all the folks can attend. So Access U Online is 5 classes. It's going to be held on Thursday. And I put the link to Access U in there, and it links out to all the different sessions. And actually, if you're here in Austin, next week, the evening events are open to the public. So just take a look at the schedule and drop by whenever you can. And we're having a just amazing keynote by Haben Girma, who was the first blind graduate of Harvard Law School. She's just an amazing woman, and you know, brilliant, and her talks are just, you know, you leave there thinking of all the things that are possible in the world, and it's really I'm so looking forward to this year. So, but you know, Glenda, you should tell them also about DQ University. You know, Joe Devon, who founded Global Accessibility Awareness Day, he said when he realized how much he didn't know, he signed up for DQ's university to learn.
So that is true. DQ University, I've just dropped the link in. It is a very economical online opportunity for people to learn. One of the things I love best about it, when Dr. Paul Bowman, our head of training at DQ, when he put this together, he proposed to our leadership, you know, I work in a .com. He said, you know what, we really need to make sure that people with disabilities can get access to this, especially if for any reason our price point doesn't work for them. And so we offer a scholarship for people with disabilities. That aside, if you want to learn web accessibility from scratch, you can learn it in here for $150 for a year in the course, in the courses, and you will get a really, really solid foundation. I could probably talk about accessibility learning opportunities all day. I think those are the main points. There's one other thing I want to bring up with certifications. Okay, I can't resist. IAAP, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, yes, that was a mouthful, has created a certification program. And so it is valuable to validate that you don't have gaps by considering the certification program. The other cool thing about the certification program, let me get the link, is that there's a list of pre-approved conferences. And so what I love about that list is, of course, John Slayton's Access U is on it, but you'll get to see some of the others that are around the country. For example, A11Y Toronto and CSUN have value as well.
Okay, very good, very good. I'm going to put a link in and it's not web access, but we do have short video tutorials that I think when they were created were to kind of be a 5-minute coffee break kind of tutorial of making documents accessible. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and so we have those on our website. And I think, Michael, weren't you involved in the creation of some of those as well?
Oh yeah, and we from our training page, we still link to some of those where we haven't done it to fit the R2R approach using the templates.
I think you guys won an award for that, didn't you?
Did we?
Yeah, I think you did. You won a national award for that. Gosh.
We have a question from the audience too. Have any of you ever experienced with e-learning, e-learning systems? I have found varying accessibility throughout. Articulate comes to mind.
Yikes. Don't use Articulate.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say that. One of my favorite things to do is when I come across a vendor that is not accessible, I like to try and open their eyes to it, because don't think of it as overwhelming, but if you help open the eyes of the company that you're standing right in front of, somebody else will catch the one that's standing there and they're standing in front of. I'm sure Sharon will have a similar answer to this question. I've worked with maybe 7 different e-learning systems back for the accessibility back at the University of Texas at Austin, as well as in my current job in DQ. We have a lot of companies that use those systems. And I gotta say, Blackboard rocks the house. They care, they are dedicated, they have lots of resources. Is anything perfect out there? I bet nothing's perfect all the time. But I do believe that Blackboard's got it together. Sharon, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Blackboard definitely put a lot of work into it. That was a case where, you know, I think those of you who purchase online learning platforms really have a lot of power, because you can just ask them, let me see your VPAT, you know, tell me how you think about accessibility, show me how you support accessibility. Now, Blackboard, like Glenda said, they're going to be right on top of it, and they're going to answer those questions. When you get the what's a VPAT sort of questions, you know you need to move on and find another vendor. And we do that honestly with any third-party thing, that when people call us and try to sell us any kind of networking or support at work or software, that communication software, you always ask for a VPAT, and that's just a great place to start. It's not going to be a guarantee, but it'll help. It'll help start the conversation with your vendors.
Yeah, I just posted a link up there for those of you who are using Captivate. We have a really smart person in our training group named Valerie Bergloff, and she developed a guide for implementing accessibility using Captivate. So I just dropped the link in there to download that if you'd like.
Oh, that's great.
And yeah, I'd like to to reiterate what Sharon and Glenda said. Blackboard definitely is the most accessible one out there, and the biggest barrier there is that it's kind of it is rather pricey. But if you've got a larger state agency, I think that it would definitely behoove you to at least explore using that.
Can someone share Blackboard resources in the chat box? And what's a VPAT? Somebody's asked, what's a VPAT?
You know, I think it's also important, I'll get back to the VPAT in a sec, but I think it's also important to realize that however accessible the platform you buy, it's also in the implementation. That the authors have responsibility too, to understand how to use the tool accessibly, and that's where training can really come in and help. But yeah, VPATs, Mike, you talk about VPATs.
Okay, so well, first let me finish up what you were talking about. So, you know, one of the first questions we always that we get all the time as the accessibility resource for the agency is, well, is PDF accessible? Is Microsoft Word accessible? Is PowerPoint accessible? And it's like, yeah, you can make accessible documents with that and presentations, but you have to do it correctly. That's been our approach, is to help people with the tools and training that they need to understand how to use that. And so you can make something that's fully accessible using Microsoft Word. You can make something that's fully inaccessible using Microsoft Word. And so that's kind of the big takeaway, I think, from what Sharon was talking about. So a VPAT is a disclosure by a company that makes software or makes web applications that says how closely do they conform to the standards in Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. And so Section 508 includes the WCAG guidelines plus a few other things like functionality. So it's a self-disclosure. If you see one that has like one word after each one of the standards that says yes, we're compliant, yes, we're compliant, yes, we're compliant, then it was probably filled out by their marketing department. But what you usually will see is yes, with minor exceptions. That seems to be the standard way to answer most of the questions, and it's because that's true. I have never seen a single large web application, website, piece of software that's absolutely fully compliant. Does that mean that it can't be used by people with disabilities? Of course not. So, you know, take for example Microsoft Office. If you look at their VPAT, it's got tons of exceptions, but it also points you to these are the workarounds. This is how you can use this. So what you need to do is look at it, look to see if it's detailed, and look to see what the workarounds are and see how that's going to work in your environment.
Right, we have another question. Any recommendations for printable forms to replace protected Word forms? Please don't say HTML or PDFs created with Adobe Acrobat.
I think you just tied our hands.
Yeah.
Because for a printable form, Word, HTML, or PDF could work. And I lean towards HTML just because I'm that kind of girl, but I don't see anything wrong with an accessible PDF. Stephanie, I'd want to ask, why are you against PDF?
And she's asking, what tools do you use to create HTML forms?
Sorry. HTML, yeah, HTML, CSS. And if someone's just printing it online, if they're going back into a database, then you got to have the database in the background. But if it's just for them to fill out, print, and send back to you, it could just be HTML and CSS.
Okay. Let's go on to our next question over here. Share a recent accessibility win or wins or innovations that you're working on in Texas or nationally. Glenda, let's start with you.
Pick me. Yay, I'm excited. So the most recent excitement, shall I say, accessibility is exciting. Last year in 2018, we advanced the international standard WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines at the W3C. It had been since 2008 since they had been updated. Internet years, that's ancient. And so 12 new success criteria, 12 new requirements were added. It was just one of hundreds of people that contributed to that, but it was really meaningful to start filling in gaps. And the particular gaps that were huge holes were low vision, people with low visions needs, mobile, like mobile accessibility, super important, and cognitive. Made great strides for low vision, made great strides for mobile, took about one tiny step for cognitive. So I'd have to discuss that one over a long dinner. And then the other thing, oh God, I've got three. The second thing is at DeQ, we've created an experience called the Empathy Lab, where we'll bring it to your organization and have people hands-on learn why accessibility is so important. And so I can take somebody that doesn't get it or is resistant, and 45 minutes to an hour later, they're chomping at the bit to learn more or racing back to their desk to go fix an accessibility problem because they get it. They understand what they're doing really means something and is not just a legal requirement, but actually important for society. I think I'll stop there so I don't take too much air.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
I think our biggest two wins lately have been, we're now working hand in hand with our communications department so that they screen all of the documents that are submitted for publication to make sure that they're accessible. And then if they're not, they refer them back to my team. The person who submitted it gets referred back to my team so that we can show them the tools and provide them with the training, including one-on-one and hands-on with the individuals to use our templates and our tools so that they can create accessible documents so that when the documents get published, they're accessible. That's been one huge win. Another one is the development teams at our agency, and there are quite a few of them, have started reaching out to us, and we're starting to provide training to the developers and to the designers on how to test for accessibility, how to design for accessibility, and how to build for accessibility. And the net result is that when it comes closer to time for release, we're finding fewer and fewer problems. And the same thing's happening with our documents. When we first started rolling this out to use the templates and the tools, things came to us and they were in terrible shape. Now when they send us something to review, we maybe find 1 or 2 minor errors that's really quick to clean up. So where my guys used to have to spend 2-3 hours working with somebody to fix their document, now it takes 30 seconds.
Very good, very good. And Sharon, what about you?
Well, I think some of the things where there's the most pain around accessibility are in the schools and in employment. And we're really happy to be collaborating with the Texas Education Agency and helping to build more outreach to stakeholders to understand. You know, teachers, we all know how overwhelmed teachers are, and you get the law says kids with disabilities have to be fully integrated to the extent possible in the classroom. But then teachers often don't know about assistive technology or the tools they have to make the digital classroom work well for students in K-12. And you know, this is a population that's really overrepresented in the dropouts and incarceration, people with disabilities at higher rates than others. So working with the schools to help them understand what are the challenges for teachers to bring equal educational opportunities to kids with disabilities has been really tremendous work for us to do. And the fact that the TEA is now invested in it and interested in finding those solutions is really encouraging to me. And another one similar to DQ's Empathy Labs, Nobility maintains a database of about, I think we're close to 800 people now, people of all kinds of disabilities. And if you want some usability testing so that you get to hear not just that you've met the requirements, but that your website or application or mobile communications are accessible for people with different disabilities, we can do usability testing either remotely or in person and help you understand just those challenges that Glenda described.
Yep, and I just dropped the link in for that because I use AccessWorks all the time to help me with recruiting. Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, you bet.
Next question. Let's start with Michael. Describe your agency's evolution with accessibility compliance. Where were you 10 years ago and where are you now? And what did it take for you to get where you are now?
Okay, so 10 years ago, we had probably just gotten our accessibility policy approved. We probably had maybe 30 people in the agency who knew how to spell accessibility. And so there was very, very little awareness. There was a lot of resistance. There was the usual thing is, I don't understand why I have to do this. Nobody in my department has a disability. People with disabilities couldn't do this anyway.
Yeah.
Those were the kinds of things that we were running into. And now we've got much better awareness. I won't say it's 100% across the 50,000 people who work for the agency. We have a lot more support among our web staff and our communication staff. I have to give a big shout out to our graphic designers in the communications department. They now produce printable materials using Adobe InDesign that are 100% accessible every time. They still send them to us to look at, and I think they're just bragging because we very seldom find a problem with those. The IT department and the web development areas are getting much more behind this. They're not resistant anymore, and so we're making a lot of strides Now we're in the process of implementing systems rather than just trying to get people to let us take a look at what you built and see if it's accessible. So in one way, we're really happy, and in another way, we're feeling sometimes we look at our workload and we go, oh my God, and so we're able to now replicate ourselves across different departments, and we're getting people that are accessibility leaders that are outside of the civil rights office and outside of the accessibility team. And I think that's just going to make things at HHS be much better in the future.
Thank you. That sounds great. Sharon, what about your agency?
Where we have evolved over 10 years. Well, we started, you know, as a, I am not at all prepared to answer this because we're not an agency in that same way. As a nonprofit organization, we have evolved from the fact of doing community outreach and raising awareness to where we now actually offer fee-for-service offerings. You know, we do consulting, audits, training for fee-for-service kind of work. But it all was a natural outgrowth out of the AIR program, and I think that was the next question you were going to ask me. So maybe I'll save it.
Let's go on to that one. Let's go on. Tell us about Open Air.
Well, and that was actually the genesis of everything that we do. Is I was a program officer at Easter Seals, and I kept trying to get employment for people with disabilities coming across these tech barriers. And I was asking all these startup entrepreneurs, you know, do you even know that your systems are accessible? And why don't you do something about it? And they were like, oh, we're too busy. If you want us to pay attention to something, find a way to make it competitive. So we started this contest called the Accessibility Internet Rally for Austin, or AIR Austin. The first one was held in 1998. And we just challenged the web community, come learn about this and then make an accessible website for a nonprofit group, many of whom didn't even have websites at all yet. And we'll give you a big bowling trophy or something. I mean, it wasn't like we gave them a trip to Aruba. But that competitive nature, that's where we got the idea that, you know, people who are designers and developers really get engaged when you give them the creative challenge. So that contest then was the sort of the beginning. We had John Slayton, Jim Thatcher, Jim Allen made the first judging form that turned into kind of an audit. And so our services all developed out of that Open Air, out of that program. So as far as state agencies, we're about to, I guess at the end of June, we're gonna, or no, the 1st of June, we're gonna launch the recruitment. And state agencies can put teams together and come get training. I think it's $100 a team. You can get training in basic accessibility, volunteer some time, either to work on a state agency project or a nonprofit project, and enter the contest. And you know, it's kind of fun. You network with other developers. One of my favorite stories was when we were doing the final design sprint on one of those years. Somebody came into the room where the judges would sit there and, you know, give you advice while you were doing your design work. Like, I'm trying to solve this problem, and the judges were right there. And somebody comes running into the judges' room and says, hey, that team has a blind person on their team. I think they're cheating. And we had to say, no, they're just really smart.
Very good, very good. Glenda, do you know anyone that has been involved with Open Air, or Michael? Do you know?
Yeah,
no, we don't know anybody.
You're talking to former trainers and judges.
I can't remember how long I've been involved. I've been involved so long. And one of the things that I have to say about Open Air is it is a brilliant way to learn. The competition, the learning and immediately applying it to something and being judged. And what I didn't expect as a person that was becoming an expert judging sites, and how addictive it is to judging sites, and how much I learn every year when I volunteer to be a judge. Mm-hmm. So you would think, oh, well, this is just to teach people that don't know about accessibility. No, I learned because in the most recent iteration of Open Air, we actually pair judges with each other, and then they have to reach consensus before turning in their scores. And so perhaps I even use it as a recruiting mechanism. Oh, I said that out loud. I love Open Air. I was the lead judge last year.
Michael, any comments on Open Air?
I think that they covered it. Yeah, I've been a judge since what, 2004, Sharon? Something like that.
Yeah, since I think since you walked through the door.
Yeah, well, my very first year back in 2003, I was on a team and I was also the tech support for the entire round. So that one was rather interesting. But yeah, judging has been, like Glenda says, it's been a real learning experience. So, my job, I work evaluating accessibility and helping people understand accessibility, 40, 50 hours a week. And so what do I do for fun in the evening? I go home and I judge air and
help others.
spend another 20, 30 hours a week during the competition.
It's addictive. What can we say?
All right, Glenda, you spent part of your career advocating for access for students with disabilities. What were the greatest challenges and how did you overcome them?
I'm an optimist, and you'll hear that in most of my answers. And so when I say this, keep that in mind. I believe that the instructional side of any higher education institution is already primed to understand that students with disabilities need equal access. And so I advise people to make friends with services for students with disabilities on large university campuses. There's an awesome services for students with disabilities on the UT Austin campus. I don't know them personally, but I bet there's one on St. Ed's. I know Austin Community College has a great program as well. And so maybe I'm too optimistic, but I've seen great things. In the beginning, the work that I did at UT over on the business side of the house, not as easy, but I love to attack a problem from both ends. And so I grassroots attacked it with John Slayton and Sharon Rush by running competitions. In other words, teach our web developers about accessibility by having them go through the AIR competition and work on their own sites at the university or at the state agency. And then I also started with John from the top end where, let's put together a task force and let's write a policy and a guideline. And so the other thing that I would say to keep in mind is, remember, if you don't have a lawsuit banging on your door, you may not get things to turn on a dime. Don't let that discourage you, because sometimes it takes knocking on the castle gate 10 times before it goes down. So just enjoy the ride.
And Sharon, I want to ask you too, because I know you mentioned K through 12 and how TEA is being really supportive right now. And can you talk a little bit about, maybe the strides that are happening, or where are we going as far as accessibility for our K through 12 kids?
Yeah, I think, well, it's early days yet. So, I mean, it remains to be seen. I know that that TEA had some attention from the federal government that they didn't especially, wasn't it was pretty tough, and they had to start paying attention to the needs of special ed kids. And one of the really important needs in the modern classroom is access to digital technology. And that's a two-part thing. You've got to have the right assistive technology for the kid and the specific disability, but then you have to have accessible curriculum products. So if your materials, you can have the best assistive technology in the world, but if the materials that they're getting are not accessible, or if the teachers don't know how to create accessible Word documents or whatever assignments they give to the kids or the parents or put on the learning, they mentioned e-learning. If those portals are not accessible, then all the best assistive technology in the world.
Hang on one second, Sharon. Somebody says the captionings aren't working, but I see them working.
I don't have them either. They stopped at Sharon. I want to ask you too.
Okay, hold just 1 second. Let me refresh the captioning window.
Thank you, Eric, for alerting us to that.
They're going across my screen, so.
Yeah, they're frozen on mine as well.
Sometimes there's an external feed if we can't get it working in the pod.
Give me just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Could be our internet.
Yeah, I think that we might be having some lag. Glenda just turned to stone.
Oh, cool. Why don't we stop our video feed of our heads just to give more bandwidth?
Okay, I just shut mine off.
We were at the top of the hour. It was the internet telling us we're done. Oh, fantastic. Let's, there's an external link to the captioning, and let's see if that works.
It's the same link.
It's working. It's working.
Oh, it's our internet.
DIR just emailed us, said it's down.
DIR just emailed and said it's down.
They're working on it. It may be really quick. They may be just rebooting something on there. It's not us, our gear. It's up there. So what you know.
1 second.
Sharon and Mikey?
Yes, Glenda.
Can you go to this closed caption URL? Because I believe it's working.
Yes, it is. I saw it too.
So Randy,
Well, let's do this. Let me turn it over.